Well, hello everybody. We are here today I can't speak Portuguese and I have a horrible short-term memory. So we're going to talk about layer twos on Bitcoin, specifically synergizing with Lightning. We have Hannah here from Lightning Labs.
Hello.
Steven from Second, a company building on Arc, and Nicolas from Lightning Spark, who just dropped their new proposal for Spark. Layer 2 building on state chains. So I think just to kind of start here, Hannah, you have been focusing mainly on Taproot assets, and then Steven and Nicolas, respectfully, Arc and Spark. So I guess do you each want to take 60 seconds or so and just kind of sales pitch each of your projects and how those can help in terms of scaling Bitcoin?
Yes, I'm having a hard time hearing you with some of the echo, but you want me to do a short yay Taproot assets pitch?
Yeah.
All right, awesome. If you're not familiar with Taproot assets, it's a protocol that of course makes use of Taproot to add assets to the Bitcoin blockchain, and if they're fungible, these assets can be exchanged on the Lightning Network. And this makes a really interesting scenario where you can have sort of a multi-asset Lightning network. One of the common use cases here we think about is stablecoins. So imagine stablecoins but brought over to the Lightning Network. Very interesting. I will also shill a talk that I'm doing at the other stage over there in an hour and a half, specifically on Taproot assets, if you want to dive in some more.
Steven?
Cool, yeah. So we recently started a company called Second. We're building a version of the Arc protocol, which until recently was the newest kit on the layer 2 block. Now we have Spark, a little bit newer. We're building a new layer 2, totally different, but still interoperable with Lightning, so Arc users will be able to make use of all the Lightning infrastructure. Also going to shill a talk I'm having later today in the Hall Finish stage at 5 to explain a little bit more in detail how the Arc protocol works.
Yeah, and at Lightspark, we are really focusing on the money movement and payment solutions. We've been on Lightning and implementing Lightning for our partners for the last couple of years. We know that Lightning and Bitcoin are great for being an open, neutral, decentralized asset. But when it comes down to scale and moving millions of transactions a second, that's where Lightning can become super helpful. But Lightning doesn't necessarily support well non-custodial use cases and enabling issuers of stablecoins on Lightning. And that's why we announced a couple of weeks ago a new Bitcoin Layer 2 fully compatible with Lightning called Spark, fully compatible with Taproot assets as well, out of the box. And we're excited to talk a bit more about it today.
All right, I guess the first thing I kind of want to get into is each of these three projects kind of have a different nuanced trust model in terms of, a stable coin depends on an issuer, and the entire value of that is ultimately dependent on them redeeming that. Arc, you have the trust that everyone's going to cooperate, and with Spark, you kind of have the operator kind of not quite being a custodian, but still having some quasi-custodial influence over the operation of that protocol. So, again, down the line, what do each of you think of when you think about these kind of trade-offs with your respective projects, and how this might influence users' decision to use it or not, or how they interact with it?
Still having trouble hearing you. One more time, the final question.
How does the trust model of Taproot asset stablecoin potentially impact users and how they interact with it?
So the trust model for how that works, right? So we could get into L2s and all that stuff, which is great. But assuming everyone's familiar with Bitcoin and Lightning, we know that's, Lightning's a layer 2, and you have unilateral exit on that, which is awesome. And Taproot assets, when you mint an asset, in Taproot assets. You can do that in a variety of ways, but it can be done very non-custodially, so you're holding your own keys. And when you have assets on the Lightning Network in a Lightning channel, that has that same trust, the same security mechanism as any Lightning channel. So if you're already familiar with that, it's the same. One thing there, though, is that if you are using an asset where there is an issuer, then you need to think about that issuer. And there's some trust involved in that issuer. And that's something you need to be aware of. But if you hold assets in a Lightning channel, you hold those assets just the same as you do the Bitcoin in that Lightning channel.
So yeah, the trust model for ARC is actually a little bit hybrid, right? So it's a fully non-custodial protocol. So the money you have in ARC is fully non-custodial, which means that even if the coordinator that we have in ARC is malicious, he can never take your money away. But when you receive payments in ARC, you're going to have a slightly different trust model until you refresh your received coins into like the fully custodial trust model. So it's kind of in the middle of like Lightning and Spark actually. Because Spark is fully in the like state chain trust model where the coordinator actually takes a little bit more of like a trusted role where he's preventing double spends. So in ARC, the coordinator is preventing double spends until you like refresh your coins to exit this like hybrid trust model. So yeah, we're fully pushing on the non-custodial side, right? So in ARC, the cost to go on chain, if the coordinator would be malicious, is a little bit high. We're trying to cut that cost as much as possible, so that even for smaller values, you can fully non-custodially use ARC. But yeah, like Lightning payments, because I said ARC supports Lightning payments are still fully non-custodial. Yeah.
And I think to add to that, you mentioned it, I think our solutions are pretty complementary, maybe going after slightly different use cases and different type of users and partners. With Spark, which is the early stage of Spark, and we'd love to get feedback and more wallets and issuers, stablecoin issuers building on Spark, we're really trying to balance trustless with user experience, obviously critical if we want to get some scale, and ease of use. So when you combine all of that for non-custodial wallets as well as issuers of stablecoins, we feel we have a pretty good hybrid solutions that is economically viable to manage large-scale volume of transactions, still maintaining, a good level of trustless aspect on the way to full trustlessness.
All right, so obviously, kind of the title of the talk here is supercharging Lightning. I think is what that actually was. All three of these different systems, in one way or another, kind of interact with or synergize with Lightning. So, given that without Lightning as that kind of connective tissue, like each of these systems would essentially be isolated in a vacuum. Like, how do you see the interactivity, the interconnection with Lightning and these different systems evolving in the long term?
Yeah, well, I think that's mostly for these two guys.
What was the question?
How do you see the interaction of like these systems, like Taproot assets, ARC, Spark, like with the Lightning Network evolving in the long term?
Yeah, and I think a lot of with these sort of new layer twos or a lot of the new things we're seeing now, one of the common threads is that interoperability with Lightning, right? So it makes all of these things, Lightning's kind of that glue that connects a lot of these different things, but I'll let you all talk about the specifics.
Yeah, so when we say like ARC is a new layer 2, we're definitely not here to replace Lightning, right? We all are big fans of Lightning, and Lightning has been working very great for anyone who has the capacity to run a Lightning node, right? So where Lightning has its problems is mostly at the edges, right? At the end users. Because for end users, it's really hard to have channels to manage their liquidity and all that. So with ARC, we're really trying to target the end users, and then the ARC coordinator will actually be a bridge for those users into the Lightning Network, right? So merchants can still have their Lightning infrastructures, bigger nodes can still have their Lightning infrastructures, and the ARC users are just using a simpler non-custodial protocol to enter this network using ARC. Different ARCs, also you can pay between different ARCs using the Lightning Network. You can pay from ARC to eCash mints using the Lightning Network. So the Lightning Network still is a really, really good payments rail for like established points in the network. I think mostly our protocols or products are targeting the end users where like the cost for channels is really annoying. The management of your liquidity is really annoying. Yeah, onboarding is a problem in Lightning. So I think Lightning is great for interoperating between different protocols and products, and we're just trying to improve the user experience for the end users.
Yeah, and I think at Lightspark we developing our solutions in kind of 3 waves. First is to get people on Lightning. For all the reasons that we just mentioned, we see this as a core foundational layer for money movement and having a more open, free, neutral ways to move money internationally. So that's why we spend a lot of the last couple of years developing a easy to implement Lightning solution called Lightspark Connect. So we have a number of partners leveraging that as the foundational layer, like Coinbase in the US, Ripio here, Bitso, and others, to really help moving Bitcoin, faster, cheaper. Then obviously we also want to target non-custodial assets and stablecoins, and that's where Spark help extending Lightning and Bitcoin to cover for those use cases in a simple way, technically, but also an economic, viable way. And because of that, I think when you combine all of those solutions, both open protocol as well as our own kind of core implementation, that become kind of a pretty powerful open payment network, targeting custodial solutions or use cases and non-custodial.
And I guess, I'm going to take turns here doing what I usually do and nitpicking and being a bit negative with a point of criticism for each thing, or at least something to consider from the negative side. I'll start with you, Hannah. So Taproot Assets is just a token issuance protocol, but the main proposed use case for it is specifically stablecoins. What do you think about the potential risk that exists as far as Bitcoin consensus and consensus changes if we actually do see massive adoption of stablecoins once again issued and transacted on the Bitcoin network rather than all these other cheaper networks they go to, given that in the event of any type of split or consensus change, that issuer essentially has a degree of control over how that split plays out, given that they get to decide which fork they will actually redeem the stablecoin on. And with that comes all of that user base, all of the mining fees that those stablecoin transactions generate for miners, and they essentially have control now over which side of the fork gets that in the event of a split in a world where stablecoins come back to Bitcoin.
So you're talking about, can someone control Bitcoin, right? And how can they control Bitcoin? And we all remember lots of these fun arguments, but you're talking about like the economic activity on Bitcoin. And so the argument there is if someone has too much economic activity on Bitcoin, then they kind of get to decide in the case of a fork where they move their economic activity. And if any of us remember back to 2016, 2017, all of these big debates, what was it? Andreas Antonopoulos' like 5 constituencies of consensus, if you remember that one, right? And you have like miners and you have developers and you have all this stuff, and you're talking about the one that is economic activity, right? And that's an important factor, right? Because all of these matter. So with Bitcoin, and the way that it works, it maintains that balance of power. So I am not worried about this specific doomsday scenario, right? Because I think you have those 5 different groups, right, that maintain that balance of power on Bitcoin. So it would have to be really pretty epic, right? It would have to be the point where like all Bitcoin does is support one particular use case for there to be someone with that much economic power that could make that kind of decision making. So because of that balance of power in Bitcoin, I'm not terribly worried about that scenario.
All right, and I guess, Stephen, ARC is a very amazing protocol in sense of how it has restructured the liquidity issue, like compared to how it works on Lightning. Like rather than having each individual user having to make decisions on where to allocate or try to get liquidity allocated from, it's just the common pot, and it can be sent to any user of the system without having to be, pre-assigned ahead of time. But it still requires kind of liquidity provided up front for the system to function. Like, how do you see ARC service providers dealing with that issue in the long term, given that if they don't have enough liquidity to keep up with the transactional volume, you essentially have to crank the fees up to try to slow users receiving down until you can claw back liquidity, or the system just stops being able to process payments at all until older ARCs expire and the ASP can get some of that money back to facilitate new transactions?
So your question is, how will the ASP manage this liquidity, or how will he?
How would they manage sourcing the liquidity and being able to get more liquidity as they grow and need more?
Well, for the calculations that we did about liquidity needs, we're pretty confident that it's manageable. It's mostly user behavior that drives liquidity needs, right? Regular users who are going to behave the way that we intend our products to be used to behave, liquidity needs will be pretty manageable. If users start doing different things, our liquidity needs are going to go up. So what we're going to do is probably just charge relatively high fees for whatever users are doing that we think they shouldn't be doing or something. So if users try to do some attacks where they're cycling their coins the whole time, needing liquidity, we're just going to charge them a lot of fees until they're going to stop doing that. I think the market for yield on Bitcoin is still very young. I think trustless yield is not something that we're kind of used to, but I think we're going to get there where we're going to be borrowing from a market to use this liquidity, and then we're going to just use this liquidity in our protocol and just make up the margin, right? So I think there's enough Bitcoin liquidity that we can borrow in a protocol like this. The liquidity we're going to use is not going to be reborrowed, right? It's kind of a trustless yield because it's just locked in a time lock, right? We use it now, we get it back in 5 days, 10 days, and the blockchain guarantees that we get it back in 5 or 10 days, right? So it's just like crossing this bridge. I'm not worried that we're gonna be able to find this liquidity in the markets. We even for pretty high rates of 5-6% on the market, our fees, the fee schedules that we calculated based on that are pretty competitive with what people are charging now in managed Lightning systems like Phoenix. So yeah, I think we're going to be okay. It's just tweaking the fees, right? If users start to be doing stuff that requires a lot of liquidity that they shouldn't be doing, we can just charge them high and they will stop doing it, I think.
All right, then I guess, Nicolas, the kind of linchpin of the security model of a state chain comes down to the operator deleting a key share. For people not familiar with state chains, the idea is that a user and an operator essentially create a single private key together where both of them only have part of it, and neither of them can ever actually sign a transaction on their own. And in a state chain, the operator essentially recreates different key shares with the new user receiving the funds, and then is supposed to delete the old share that matches the original users so that they can only sign with the new user now. How does Spark intend to manage that deletion operation? I know Commerce Block with their Mercury layer implementation use the SGX enclave to actually produce a proof that's verifiable that the enclave deleted that information. Are you guys also going to use some trusted execution environment or something to guarantee that doesn't present a security concern in terms of if the operator was compromised, the consequences it could have for users?
Yeah, I think the question is around how do we create that compatibility across different networks, across different wallets, and that's where we feel that Spark combined with an open protocol that we helped design at LightSpark called UMA, the Universal Money Address, can be pretty powerful. UMA is a LNURL extension to address some of the compliance, travel rule and tax requirements that some of our partners may have, being either the sending or the receiving financial institutions. Also covered some of the FX conversion requirements when you move money from, let's say, Brazil to the US. If you want to do it in a non-custodial way, you can now doing that on Spark. We're using state chain, behind the design of Spark. And to be fair, it's early days. And that's why we're here, talking to as many wallets as possible and others to really see what would be the best implementation that combine the ease of use and adoption as well as the benefits of, an open payment network.
All right, and I guess kind of the elephant in the room here is stable coins in terms of a transactional tool. Bitcoin's volatility really makes it kind of a painful currency to use for transactions for anybody who isn't, relatively well off financially. I can predict two of your answers, so I guess we'll see what you have to say, Stephen. But what are your thoughts on whether Bitcoin can actually take a role natively at any type of large scale as a transactional currency? Or do you think stablecoins are essentially going to dominate that use case and all of these protocols, Lightning, Arc, Spark, might just wind up becoming a vehicle for stablecoin transactions more than actual native Bitcoin transactions? I guess we want to just go down the line again.
Okay, I think I got most of that. All right. So I want Lightning to be a vehicle for economic interaction, right? Like that's what I hope personally happens, right? And with stable coins, if you look at the numbers of stablecoin usage, like over the past couple of years, right, that's really just gone, boom, way up. And you say, okay, well, what's going on there, right? And I think it's quite clear that people in a lot of places around the world need better money, and stablecoins are, fulfilling a need for them at this point in time, right? And because of that stability, and even if it's stable relative to a fiat currency, right? There are a lot of people in the world that don't have, disposable income, that can't just open their wallet and be like, oh, I lost 20% today. Oh, well, right? So that's really filling an important need. And when I think about that, right, where do you want those people, where do you want that economic activity happening, right? And it could be on all kinds of different chains. I'm really excited to have that economic activity happening back on Bitcoin, right, and on the Lightning Network. Now, you seem to worry about that, right? As in you think that's going to be too much activity happening on there, and why would that be an issue?
Just having the issuer have that much influence over the protocol, given that none of these transactions occur unless they honor redemptions at the end of the day.
So one of the really cool things about this scenario is that someone who starts using a stablecoin on Lightning might not be intending to adopt Bitcoin, the unit of account, but they are adopting Bitcoin, the infrastructure, right? And when you have a whole bunch of people then on that system, on that infrastructure, right? If we have someone who misbehaves, right? If you have a powerful entity there who then, for whatever reason, decides to misbehave, it's someone's already got that infrastructure in their wallet, and it's one button to switch to something else, And so I think that is really what keeps things in line a lot, is when users have choice, right? They can just opt into something else. And so I really like bringing people over to Bitcoin Lightning infrastructure, and if someone does misbehave, it's, push the other button. So.
How about stable coin Lightning channels on Liquid? Liquid's a sidechain has existed for a long time, and if you're gonna accept the counterparty risk trade-off of a stablecoin, of an issued stablecoin, doesn't a model like Lightning, like Liquid, makes an equal sense, because you also have a counterparty risk of the cosigners there. but you don't have the high transaction cost that Bitcoin has, the I don't know, convoluted protocols you need to build to do the stablecoins on Bitcoin and in Liquid they're native. Is that something worth considering?
Did you call Taproot assets convoluted?
I mean, it's definitely more complicated than native assets where you just
It is
slap the tag on it.
complicated, but if you're, I don't know, I'm used to it at this point. I find it beautiful. But so with something like Liquid, it's different set of trade-offs, right? So you get a little bit more here and you lose a little bit more there, right? So I think with different use cases and in different scenarios, you have to think about the trade-offs. So there might be some sort of use case where someone does want to use that. And then I think there's still going to have quite a lot of use cases where people really want that unilateral exit, even if there is an issuer of an asset that they have some sort of trust relationship with. So I think it really depends on the scenario.
And I think to build on what that exchange was, I think having a open, versatile, agnostic set of protocols and platform that can cover multiple use cases when sometimes stables make sense. In some region we're working on in Africa, for example, in part of LATAM, some people want to send or receive stables. They don't necessarily want that direct interaction with their local fiat currency. And stables, needs to be supported for those type of use cases. And that's why in our open platform, we're launching soon, at the end of this year, a place for issuers to issue on Spark and on UMA, for those use cases. We also want to cover fiat-to-fiat money movement, when Lightning can be the tissue converting from one fiat to another instantly. So I think that very agnostic, open payment money network that we're all at different levels developing is what's going to make money movement very agnostic globally.
All right, well, this kind of, I think, makes a good last topic, but the issue of stable coins using something like Lightning or Arc or these other layers as kind of a connective tissue. What are all your thoughts on the regulatory risks of the nature of using a system like Lightning changing when it becomes actually converting from one currency to the other versus just the same asset being kind of atomically passed?
Okay, so the question is regulatory risk of these protocols. So I am not a lawyer, I am a tech nerd, so this question makes me nervous.
Well, you have an armchair like the rest of us.
Look, one thing that I always keep in mind with this stuff is that this is global tech, right? If we have, and we've seen this happen, right, a particular jurisdiction that becomes very unfavorable to this tech, if people like it, if people want to use it, if it's valuable, they're just going to use it somewhere else, right? And it'll be used elsewhere. So I think, again, kind of because of the game theory and of this being global tech, it's possible, we've seen it happen, to have regulatory environments which are not at all favorable. If that happens, what happens is you drive the use of that to other places. And if this is very valuable and useful stuff, then that's going to hurt that jurisdiction that regulated it away. So I'm optimistic still, yeah.
All right, Steven, did you have any concerns around that kind of nature of routing Bitcoin across Lightning being very different from exchanging a stable coin to Bitcoin to be routed and that being treated differently?
Is that for me? This guy, okay.
Maybe I can, touch on that regulatory question. At Last Spark, we debated, for the open payment network that we want to build, where should we build this? And obviously, Bitcoin for us, one of the reasons why to build on Bitcoin was the regulatory clarity that Bitcoin has in most regions. There is still some open questions about stables. And I think we're all here testing a few different use cases, working with regulators to see what we can or cannot do. And it's a fast evolving landscape. But I think building on Lightning, building on Bitcoin actually bring a lot of that clarity. So it's a good kind of baseline. And then we're going to all learn, based on different use cases and what's happening going forward.
All right.
Small Well, comment on that. I think a lot is changing in the regulatory world. I think we're going to have to see what happens. I think they're only starting to realize recently that this is a space that's going to grow. So I think Europe, US are still very much figuring out what they want to do with it, and I think we're just going to have to see what's going on.
All right, well, thank you, all of you, for giving your time for the audience on this panel. I guess that is time.
Thank you.
Thank you.